I call the Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'm pleased to take a call on the Westpac New Zealand bill, which, as earlier speakers have noted, is not a government bill. It's a private bill brought on behalf of Westpac New Zealand in order to make changes to the assets which fall within that corporate entity rather than a prior corporate entity, and so are available effectively to creditors of the New Zealand Westpac Bank in the event that something goes wrong, so that if, for example, there was losses on their loan book and they would have a greater pool of assets to which depositors would be able to have recourse to in order to be repaid the deposits that they have lent to the bank. Mr Speaker, of course, this has arisen in part because the Reserve Bank back in 2003 noted that New Zealand was too exposed to risk as a consequence of our major banks, mainly or in part, being incorporated in Australia, so that their business and their deposit taking might be via a New Zealand entity, but the asset holding that lay behind the bank actually wasn't open to recourse from those depositors because those assets were held by a parent company in Australia rather than by the New Zealand subsidiary. And the Reserve Bank went about changing that, and since that time has caused the New Zealand branches of Australian banks to be incorporated in their own right and for have assets, substantial assets, transferred into them. Now, this is the latest example of that in that it transfers some additional assets from the Westpac parent company into the New Zealand company, and these are principally assets and liabilities arising from their institutional banking business, which are now to be vested in Westpac New Zealand. Mr Chairman, there are a number of aspects to ensuring stability of financial markets, and having properly capitalised banks is one important part of that, and that's what this bill addresses. Of course, of similar importance, in my view, to the strength of financial markets is the level of savings that you have in a country, so that you have sufficient levels of deposits available to banks or other financial intermediaries to lend to our commercial enterprises coming from New Zealand sources. And this bill does nothing to fix that, and I think it's interesting that this bill is being considered against the background of a budget to be read tomorrow, and that budget has already been signalled by the government as, amongst other things, restoring the default rate of contribution for KiwiSaver back up to 4%. And it's interesting because now we are close to, over 2.5 years into the term of this government, nearing the end of its term, and the centrepiece of their budget this year is reversing their reversal on KiwiSaver. I think that's quite interesting, isn't it? If you think that they in prior years dropped the default contribution rate into KiwiSaver from 4% to 2%, and now they are, a year or two later, reversing that, with some hooks, obviously, but they're reversing that by increasing the default rate from 2% to 4%. So the centrepiece of their budget is the reversal of their reversal, is the reversal of the reversal. Amy Adams doesn't want to talk about this, but of course it does impact on the security of financial markets. And it is very relevant to the security of financial markets, because if you don't have sufficient homegrown deposits to your bank, you're more reliant on overseas lines of credit. You're more likely to agree to extending the multiples that banks like Westpac can lend to make up for the deficit in New Zealand-based deposits born of New Zealand-based savings. So Amy Adams might not think that might not want to talk about this. Might not want to talk about the fact that the centrepiece of this year's budget is likely to be the reversal of National's prior reversal. But I certainly think it is relevant. Mr Speaker, Mr Chairman, the Westpac New Zealand bill then is good insofar as it goes. It does actually improve the security of New Zealand depositors in their deposits to the Westpac Bank by making sure that more of Westpac's parents' assets are in the New Zealand-based company, Westpac New Zealand Limited. And that's a good thing, but it does nothing on other parts of the financial markets which are important, which notably are the strength of our savings. And as I've said,
I call the honourable member Brendan